This is episode 67 with Nicholas Gregory.
Welcome to Spot On Insurance. Join us each week as we speak to insurance professionals, attorneys, regulators, and compliance specialists on topics ranging from improving your agency to staying on the right side of the law. Subscribe and stay informed on the effects of new trends and disruptive emerging technologies on your businesses and your industry.
Nicholas Gregory works as counsel at Akin Gump. He focuses on complex commercial litigation with an emphasis in the areas of consumer class action defense, false advertising cases, insurance litigation, board governance and merger disputes, and internal and government investigations. He also advises Insurtech and other companies on business and regulatory issues, with a particular focus on the intersection of insurance and technology. He has handled matters in state and federal courts across the country and has extensive courtroom and trial experience, including first chairing numerous jury trials to verdict. Nicholas, welcome to Spot On Insurance.
Thank you, Ted. It's my pleasure to be here.
So glad to get to chat with you today. I think it's been a couple of months since we met out in San Francisco. What conference was that? Insurtech Fusion, I believe it was?
Silicon Valley Insurance Accelerator, I believe, SVIA.
Yes. So I'm really excited to have you on here today to talk with our audience on all of your expertise. But first of all, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about your background, what you've done in the past, and how you are where you are today.
Yeah, so a litigator by trade. I work out here in the Bay Area where we met. I'm in Akin Gump, San Francisco office. I do all sorts of complex commercial litigation, and I've done some work at the prosecutor's office as well. I came out here. I'm originally from Iowa, and I came out here for my first summer associateship at a large law firm, and I've stuck around ever since. I had a hunch that there were probably worse places to start a career than out in the Bay Area with the economy going the way it was, and so here I am.
Fantastic. And so you love it there, huh?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great place to be. Obviously, everyone gripes about the real estate prices, but so far, I'm sticking around.
So tell me, what adventures have you been on recently?
So recently, I just went with a group from Lawyers Without Borders to Kenya to participate in a training there. It was kind of a training of trainers for prosecutors. And so we have some attorneys and partners here that work very closely with the Lawyers Without Borders people. And we spent a week there doing a training and getting to see a little bit of Kenya.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Where else have you gone?
So this was the first one. I'd kind of worked with them before to help out with some materials and worked with some different partners with them. But this was the first time that I actually got the call that someone said, hey, we need some help. So I cleared my schedule as best as I could and jumped on a plane.
That's awesome. It's interesting because we're going to be having someone from Africa very shortly on one of our upcoming episodes. And she does a lot of work in the Insurtech space, and she listens to our podcast from there. So it's like, it's cool because the podcast is being listened to. We have people in Australia, in Africa, all over the world. So pretty neat.
It really is the beauty of our new podcast positive culture here. I mean, I've got my list of podcasts that I listen to, and it's, I think, just wonderful to be able to plug in when you're commuting to work or when you're working out and, get some sort of education or intellectual sustenance or something like that. So It's a very positive development, I think.
Yes. So, of course, what we want to talk about today is Insurtech. We want to talk about what's happening, what's out there, your experience with it. And so let's jump into that. And if you just talk to us about your experience with it and what regulatory challenges you've come across.
Yeah. So when we work with younger companies, and we've started to work with younger companies, especially after insurance professionals might leave the insurance world because they're looking for something more fun and exciting, and we still retain relationships with those people who go into insurtech startups. They'll come to us with different kind of regulatory issues or kind of high-level business strategy. So it might be wanting us to look over a business plan to see if there's maybe some way to offer the product that they want outside of the insurance regulatory environment, or if there are any specific issues like anti-rebate issues, or whether there are different ways they can charge fees. There's obviously the 50-state problem of trying to make sure you're in compliance with 50 states. And I think kind of unpacking those one by one, Ted and Arlene, I talked a little bit about this at the SVIA conference in terms of trying to place your business model outside of the insurance regulatory environment. There was actually a very interesting case recently, Heckert, I think it was A1 v. Heckert, and all the briefings are online and the case is online, that I think went a long way to illustrating what kind of the rule is in California, as many of you are aware. So Heckert addressed this issue in California of what kind of product falls under insurance. And the definition of insurance in California is incredibly broad. It basically would cover any kind of indemnification clause in any contract. So the courts have come up with this way to limit the application of that definition. So for instance, if you are painting someone's home and there's an indemnity clause in the contract that says, I'll cover your expenses for anything that I do to damage the home or something, technically that could fall under insurance. But the courts have said, look, if the primary purpose of the contract is for services, for example, that's not insurance. And so this Heckert case came along and kind of gave everyone some of the contours about when that primary purpose test can be applied. So we kind of try to distill cases like that and try to understand where there might be opportunities to avoid regulation, where there are going to be situations where clients are squarely within the regulatory environment, and things like that. So that's one example. The anti-rebate issue, I'll give a little bit of background on what I'm talking about with anti-rebate. I'm sure most of the audience is on board, but in almost every state in the nation, with the notable exception of California, we have these anti-rebating laws. And what they basically say are, if you are an insurance producer and you're selling insurance, you can't give something extra to the customer to induce them to buy insurance from you. Now that historically has been kind of a kickback of a commission. Let's say I'm a producer and I get a 20% commission. I might say to the customer, I'll give you 10% of that commission if you buy the product with me. So right. Most states have laws that prohibit that. So because a lot of these new companies, these new Insurtech companies are working on problems like distribution or customer engagement, they start running into issues or potential issues with anti-rebate laws when they start giving away perks or free software or things like that. And I think we saw that most fully realized in the Zenefits case, where we actually got some administrative law decisions and a lot of parsing of statutory language and things like that.
And what's interesting is that a lot of these Insurtech startups, that's kind of like their business model, right? They're coming up in this online space where it's very common to give out freebies. And a lot of them are not well versed in regulations, in insurance regulations. So that was like an eye opener for everyone, that whole Zen thing.
Right. Absolutely. And I think you've put your finger on something else there, Arlene, is that this kind of dual culture that we see in the Insurtech industry. So on the one hand, we have the tech side, which includes people who are used to, quote unquote, moving fast and breaking things. And on the other hand, we have this highly regulated environment where it might not always make sense to move fast and break things and let regulation catch up. So I think there's tension there in the culture. So to take the Zenefits example, their business model was primarily based on, at the time, giving away kind of free HR software and then eventually having those software customers purchase insurance from them. And a lot of jurisdictions, that was a perfectly acceptable business model. In the state of Washington, the insurance commissioner took a great deal of interest in it, ended up in the end finding that was an impermissible rebate given to customers. So It's an interesting issue, and it's percolating through the courts, and a lot of companies are trying to find ways to deal with this and trying to project, the kind of risks that they may see in the future.
Right. And I think that was a really costly mistake because I think New York ended up fining them like $123 million. So
yeah, well, let me stop you there. There were actually a couple issues too, so I just want to make sure we don't complete. I know there's some licensing issues as well that definitely caused a headache for benefits moving forward.
Right. So when a lot of these folks come to you, and not so much the ones that have already been in the insurance industry and are now starting up their own little startup, because those folks are pretty well versed in regulatory compliance, but the ones that are probably primarily tech first and then getting into the space of insurance, when they come to you, are they just shocked at all of the regulatory hurdles that they have to go through?
They are, and I would add one point to that. I think they're shocked at this 50-state problem. The idea that even if you know what the broker fee regulation is in Texas, you might need to go look and see what it is in Oregon or Washington or Idaho. And that becomes a major headache. And I think the number one sort of criticism we see of insurance regulation is this 50-state issue and what the potential solutions are. And if that involves some sort of federal involvement or something else, I think that remains to be seen.
Right. And one of the things, what do you see like in terms of the opportunities out there for these Insurtech startups when it comes to the incubators that are out there, the knowledge that's being provided to them, all the investors that are out there willing to put money into this whole space? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think since 2011 or so, we've just seen a huge increase in the amount of money that investors are putting into Insurtech startups. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's probably something like tenfold what it was in 2011.
Uh-huh.
And that includes both venture capital and also a lot of strategic investors that feel they don't want to be left behind from this Insurtech revolution, and so are investing a lot. And if you go to the conferences, which I know you all do, and I'm sure a lot of the audience does, you'll hear from the people inside these strategic investors and their approach and their strategy. And certainly this is a great opportunity for young companies to find funding. I think the key point here is that the industry knows it has so much opportunity to improve. It is just ripe for improvement.
I think it's also about not just that there's an opportunity, but there's such a push for it. The idea that if you don't get ahead of this, you will fall behind and there may be nothing for you. We've had plenty of guests here that have talked about the similar topic, and it's like you either get to it or you're done. In the university, they say publish or perish. Well, in this particular case, you either get up with technology or you will be left behind.
Right, absolutely. And to that point, I was at a conference not too long ago. It was either the NAIC meeting that recently took place or maybe Insurtech Connect. But the head of NAIC was talking about this point of innovation and this push for innovation and how it's largely coming from consumers, which I think makes this a unique situation for regulation, right? Because consumers are demanding, I want a digital version of my policy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, take that for instance. There are very few institutions I work with now that I can't go to my email, type in a search term, and get a statement. My credit cards, my bank, many institutions I work with. Insurance right now, that's still kind of an issue of just saying, look, I'm going to go get my policy right now. I'm going to have a digital version of it, and I know I can sign in and kind of interact with my provider. So things like digital business model, quick claims processing, quick underwriting. People want things faster. They want it less expensive, and they want it simpler. And I think those are all key points in this thrust for innovation. And the NAIC knows that, and the states know that. So everyone's kind of a stakeholder in moving this process forward.
Right. I think blockchain is going to add a lot to that. We've had plenty of discussions on that before. And once that happens, you're talking about not having to fill out so many forms.
Right. And absolutely. And on that point, the filling out forms, one thing that I hear a lot of from consumers, and then I think about myself quite a bit as a litigator who litigates policy language, is what appears to be unnecessarily complex and convoluted language in insurance policies. And I know that there are companies that are trying to attack that problem. I think Lemonade, for example, has trumpeted its approach where it's starting to crowdsource suggestions and is working with regulators to try to develop more simple policies. Now, if you talk to insurance litigators, they'll tell you, look, that language might be complex, but it's based on 100 years of case law defining the contours of what this language should be. And in some cases, it might be dozens of pages of language that's legally required by state law. There might be, endorsements that Florida or Texas require every time you issue a policy. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. I do have a story that I think might help illustrate this. This actually just happened recently. But when I think about the complexity of language, this jumps to mind.
Great. Share it.
So we had a case recently where an insured had a professional liability policy with the insurer, and the insured was sued, submitted the claim to the insurer, and there was a dispute about whether or not coverage existed for $25,000 or $2 million.
Whoa.
So pretty wide gap.
Yeah.
And this was a dispute that went to federal district court. The parties argued over for months. The district court found that the policy unambiguously, this is the word that the district court used, unambiguously provided for $25,000 of coverage, and that no reasonable person could read the contract otherwise. We got hired to do the appeal. And by the way, this district court judge made this ruling after dozens of pages of briefing, oral argument, hours of thoughtful consideration. We appealed that to the Ninth Circuit, and again went through an entire briefing to a panel of 3 judges. And just last week, we got the decision from the Ninth Circuit that said, we disagree, we're reversing the district court, and there is $2 million of coverage in this policy.
Holy
so, right. And so just to show you the kind of complexity involved here, you show it to one judge, the judge says unambiguously provides $25,000. You show it to the next 3 judges, they say, no, it's not unambiguous, it's ambiguous, and it provides $2 million. Now that was a huge victory for our client, of course, and so I'm kind of trumpeting that success. Right. But I think it speaks to this larger issue of the complexity of language that we have. We have 4 trained judges who are trained to interpret language and interpret policy and come to the exact opposite conclusion. And so the idea that this consumer who's being handed this policy kind of is going to clearly understand exactly what's provided on first glance, or, hardly any glance in some cases, right, I think is kind of a fiction.
Spot On is sponsored by Insurance Licensing Services of America. Need help with corporate name changes, annual returns, or surplus lines tax filings? Feeling overwhelmed? If you're looking for experts in regulatory compliance, you've come to the right place. ILSA provides the industry with over 50 services. To learn more about the company and how they can help, visit ilsainc.com.
Yeah.
So you think that the simplification of language, if somebody like Lemonade gets to do it, do you think that will bring more litigation as a result? Because, if you take out the simplicities, if you add in all that simplicity, sometimes it takes out the protection that you can have by really making it pure with the legal language.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question and remains to be seen. One argument that I've heard in favor of simplicity is that, look, insureds, when they're denied coverage, if they actually think what they're being denied wasn't provided for in the contract, then they're okay with that, as long as they knew up front.
Mm-hmm.
And if they actually think they're owed coverage, then they want that coverage. So one argument, I think, in favor of simplification, and this may not be borne out in the end, but it's certainly an argument, is that you're just trying to establish the most honest and transparent relationship you can with the insured. And that hopefully at the end of the day, that will actually cut down on litigation. So like I said, remains to be seen, but it is an interesting point.
Yeah, great point.
And let's be honest, the kind of issue of trust in the insurance industry is a big one. You often have consumers that don't trust their insurers, that don't feel very engaged with their insurers, that don't think about insurance very often. So I think steps in that direction are certainly worth trying.
So here we're just talking about simplifying the whole insurance purchase process, the whole delivery. But one thing that we haven't even touched upon is, we're talking about how the insurance carriers, the insurance agencies, that they have to get ahead of this technology and they have to embrace all these technological advances. But let's go back to regulation and talk about even just a broker trying to market, like they're dealing with all of these states, 50 states, 53 jurisdictions, getting licensed, and it's not an easy process. We're now at the stage in our lives where we're trying to buy on-demand insurance, but you can't get on-demand licensing, right? So you're a broker goes through getting licensed in every single state, oftentimes for licenses that they're not even using at the time. And with that comes a bunch of reporting requirements. If they have licenses in surplus lines, even if they haven't written business in that state, there's still reporting requirements. So I guess my point is we have to be so involved with the regulators to streamline that process of getting licensed, of making the experience for the broker less cumbersome, and almost like, hey, I just need this license for 6 months, or I need it, I don't need it. I shouldn't have to be having all these reporting requirements when I'm not actually using that license.
When you run into those issues, some of it has to do with money. You make this thing disappear, the state may make less money on it, so we've seen states get rid of some things that we thought were rather absurd. And then in other states, other 2 or 3 states add those same things because they're trying to pick up money, basically.
Right. It's just, right now with all of the consumer wanting things on demand so quickly, it'd be cool if brokers could also okay, I just need that license today, and you could get it that fast, right? Which in some states you can get a license, within 24 hours, but that's not the case in every state.
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of opportunity for the application of a lot of these same technologies we're seeing in the private sector for the government sector. So the whole RegTech kind of push that you hear people talking about. And Ted, to your point, maybe blockchain. If there's a way that the governments can use blockchain to help with licensing, and so that there's one kind of distributed ledger for licensing. Now, somebody who's an expert in blockchain would need to kind of work out the details of that. But it just seems that there's a lot of ways to automate these processes that are out there. And as you rightly say, Ted, some of that will encounter resistance just because of the vested interests. Okay, does that mean licensing professionals or regulators now lose their jobs? It's very similar to the discussion that's being had around automation generally and the coming of kind of unmanned vehicles. How do we start accounting for job loss at the end of the day? And that's an incredibly important and I think interesting conversation.
Well, to your point on blockchain, we're trying to do that at ILSA. We've already got a startup that we're working with to try to do as much blockchaining of our process as possible, taking us to the state, and maybe later on working with the states to make that happen. So we're trying to head that off as well, making sure that we on our side are not the last to put that together, but actually take the lead on regulatory compliance and blockchaining.
Right. Oh, yeah. And I think that could be a very fruitful partnership moving forward.
Yeah.
And I will note, I'll just put a plug in for the NAIC is thinking about how to streamline processes as well. I do know that their big data group has raised an initiative where, complex filings go to the NAIC for kind of initial approval, and then back to the states for final approval. So, with the big data revolution and potentially new ways to start pricing products and new and complex algorithms, I think states can use some help in trying to streamline that process.
Absolutely. Ted and I will be attending the NAIC Insurance Summit in Kansas City in probably like 2 weeks or so, or in a week. We're looking forward to all of the RegTech sessions and, talking to the regulators about, how far in the horizon do they see some of these things being implemented.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Well, I hope I won't be making it to that one, but I do hope the two of you will be coming out here to San Francisco for the NAIC's year-end meeting.
We probably will.
I wanted to talk to you about the Insurtech innovators and some of the startups that you dealt with. For every success story, there are plenty of failures. Have you seen a common denominator for failures?
I don't know if I've seen any common denominator that is specific to Insurtech that wouldn't also apply to just the rest of the startup world. So, oftentimes what you will see for young companies is that they might not get out ahead of issues that they should be getting out ahead of. And rightly, I'm not saying rightly so, but you understand why they're focused on raising funds. They're focused on hiring a team, building a product that people love. They're focused on all the fun stuff. So it's entirely kind of understandable why they don't always have their eye on legal implications or regulatory compliance. It's tough to say that that's always going to be a failure. You can look at companies that did quite well waiting for regulation to catch up. Uber and Airbnb kind of just pushed ahead and became so valuable to consumers that it was almost unthinkable, to have a city outlaw it, to have San Francisco. If San Francisco tomorrow, if the mayor stood up and said, Uber is no longer available here because of they're not complying with all the taxi regulations, you would have an uprising. I think people have come to rely on it so much, and so they've been able to kind of grow and negotiate those problems as they arise. Not obviously, it's been a bumpy ride along the way. No pun intended. But that certainly can be a point that can bring a company down. The kind of failure to look ahead and failure to be compliant with every regulation. So it's certainly something to think about. But there are companies that have also done well, kind of moving straight ahead. I think the key point there is there are many ways to succeed and fail.
One of the things that you talked about, Nick, was the fun things that the startups are focusing on. And one of them is bringing in that money, getting investors in there, getting that VC funding. Do you have like a couple of suggestions that you would give Insurtechs to attract investors?
I would say, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. Mm-hmm. But I would say that the kind of general conventional wisdom is that, you have a great product and a great team that people believe in. So if you can pitch yourself and make plausible arguments that you've got a great product and a great team, then I think you're well on your way to attracting funding, because certainly people want this area to succeed. I think everyone wants insurance to be better.
Right.
Consumers certainly do. The insurance companies want to be able to better meet consumer needs. So if you've got the good product and the good team, you're in the right place.
it's a $3 trillion market, right? And it's a very stable market, but there's just so much room for improvement. So in the horizon, it's just going to be better. So that's the great thing about what's going on right now, about the shakeup. Want to get your opinion. What do you see in the pipeline?
I think from a regulatory perspective, the NAIC hopefully will start taking some steps to really start harmonizing. I think that they will start focusing on pricing. A lot of the discussion thus far has focused on distribution, customer engagement, marketing. But at some point, this pricing piece, I think people are going to have to start focusing on. With big data, we have all sorts of ways to know things about things we didn't know before, and all sorts of repositories of data. And at some point, people are going to want to start using that data to try to better assess risk. And so knowing where the boundaries are for what you can use and what you can't use and how you can use it, and also harmonizing those contours, I think is going to be very important. I'll give one example of I think something Wisconsin's insurance commissioner, Ted Nickel, mentioned at one of the conferences. He was saying basically, look, you might be scrubbing all sorts of data and cross-referencing this data to try to find correlations. And you may find that the year that a Nicolas Cage movie comes out, I hope I'm not massacring this, but I think it should be an okay kind of summary. The year that a Nicolas Cage movie comes out, there might be 10 times more pool deaths, right? And that might be a correlation that exists. Now, whether or not that correlation is actuarially sound and a sound basis on which to therefore charge higher general liability homeowners insurance prices, that remains to be seen. Or once you start getting into that business, now you can run that calculation for all sorts of hypotheticals, and we're just going to start helplessly finding correlations between things and deciding whether or not these are correlations we can live with, or if they're correlations that are even permitted by state law. And I guess one point that I think is important there is oftentimes people don't even understand the differences between state law in terms of very general attributes that you can use. Can you use, for instance, genetic information in life insurance? Can you use age in certain contexts in auto, for instance? Can you use gender in auto? In some states you can, in some states you can't. And so that's just very basic. That's not even cross-referencing all sorts of data. So once we start getting even more complicated, I think people are going to be looking, I guess people will be desperate to find guideposts that can help them innovate in compliance with the regulatory environment.
Right. Absolutely.
As someone in our circle of insurance professionals, what advice can you share with somebody that's just entering the industry?
I would say my advice would be to really understand the environment that you're working in, and seek out very smart and experienced people who understand it, and either make them a part of your informal network, or if possible, better yet, make them a part of your team. Because having smart, experienced people you can use as a sounding board and that might see issues that you don't see is absolutely invaluable.
I take that not just for the individual coming in the industry, but you can really say that same thing about new Insurtech startups that, are having these regulatory problems and issues, that if they follow that rule and get themselves together with, people in the know who they can use as sounding boards, people who actually do regulatory compliance, for example, it can make a big difference in their success.
Right. It can make a huge difference. And I think a key point there is that some of the regulations aren't always intuitive. Anti-rebating is a perfect example of that. In many industries, somebody can give me a free $5 coupon and it's not a big deal. And in fact, it's great for the consumer to have Walmart and Target giving rebates to me. So it's not always intuitive in a way that would make sense if you didn't know about it.
Right. That's such a great point. Nick, if someone wants to contact you, how would they do so?
Yeah, so I'm here at Akin Gump in San Francisco, and I'm up on the web. You can Google me. So it's Gregory at akingump.com, and always happy to chat about these issues. So, feel free to get in touch with me.
And I'm also on LinkedIn.
Yes. So feel free to reach out.
Very good. It's been wonderful having you on Spot On Insurance. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all the knowledge that you have shared with us.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure, and I hope we can catch up at the next NAIC meeting out here, if not sooner.
Okay. Right. Sounds good.
Sounds like it's going to happen. Next week, join us for episode 68 with Ryan Hanley. He's the Chief Marketing Officer at TrustedChoice.com. He's a keynote speaker and editor-in-chief of Aegis Nation. Ryan points out that there's a little battle taking place online every day. It's not a fight for the fate of the world, just the future of your business. It's a battle far too many businesses are losing. It's a battle for attention, or as he calls it, content warfare. So that's next week at episode 68. Thank you for joining us.
Visit spotoninsurance.com, where you'll discover an ever-growing library of podcasts, videos, articles, and online tools by professionals for professionals to enhance your insurance education. By the way, that's where you'll also find our podcast notes and bonus resources. Please don't forget to click the iTunes link to rate and review, and let others know what you think of Spot On Insurance. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.